Today's guest is Julian Larimer. He's a former Army officer whose military career began in Fort Irwin and went through command in Hawaii. With a surfboard in hand, he's now got a thriving career in defense tech. But his story is more than career moves. It's about redefining his identity, finding joy in unstructured play, and realizing that fulfillment doesn't just come from chasing titles. Let's dive in.
The way I kind of relate it is when you're in the army, it's like you're on a conveyor belt where as long as you follow the DA PAM and you're successful in each step, the conveyor belt is going to keep moving. And then when you get out of the military, you're no longer on that. Your direction is dictated by you and what you want to do. And I'd argue that knowing what you want to do and knowing where you want to go are probably the most important things that you can lock in your time that you're getting out.
Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military.
Curse of being Hawaii based with West Coast company, just your calendar will fill up with stuff between 6 and 9 a.m. And I'm always afraid to complain about that because the solution to that problem is, okay, we'll just have you move back to the West Coast then. So
Right.
I'm really careful about picking my battles on that one.
Yeah.
Well, I'm stoked. How do you guys usually kick this thing off?
We just start asking questions about your military experience kind of from the beginning. And then we can go a little bit into your transition. And then from there, we really just kind of pivot into questions that make sense and talk about your experience and what advice you have to other service members who might be thinking about a transition.
Okay, awesome. So to kick it off, I was an armor officer. I got started in 2015. Fun fact, I think I was like second from the bottom in my cohort of armor cadets at the academy. So I owed an extra 3 years of service because I saw the movie Fury in 2014 and I was like, I have to be on tanks. And I equated to not getting out of the army until I was 29. So I have to thank Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf for sticking around for command and all of that. But my first assignment was actually at Fort Irwin, of all places. And I just remember thinking this was going to be one of the worst places to be. My career's over before it even started. And, truthfully, I think that was some of the most fun that I had in my adult life. For 10 days out of the month, you got to go play in a giant laser tag match with every brigade in the army. And sure, there was a bit of a hit to my ego because you're not getting to be on an Abrams as much as everyone else. I mean, Jack, you were armor as well. So you, of course, just know like how excited we get to be on that platform and to shoot gunnery and do all those cool things. But I think like one of the things I loved about Armor Branch was it was a cool combo of technology, maneuver, and doctrine. Once when I completed my time at Fort Irwin, I kind of had a feeling I'd want to get out after command, but I wasn't completely certain. And when I was at the career course, I had three options for my branch rep because it was before we switched to the marketplace where you do that kind of blind Tinder match to determine your next unit in your future. And my branch manager said you can go to Bragg, Polk, or Hawaii. And I looked at him, I'm like, I think you know exactly what the answer is. He's like, yeah, so you want to go to Bragg, right? I'm like, absolutely not. I want to go to Hawaii. So that's how I ended up in 2nd Brigade in the 25th Infantry Division, specifically 214 Cav. And it was an amazing experience. Like, there's very few assignments that will enable you to live on a place like the North Shore and just be surrounded by the height of the surf industry and then also great training in the Army. So my mid-20s were just fun. I did about 14 months on staff. And then after that, finally took command of my troop. Kind of the highlight of that, even though it was COVID times and definitely slowed the op tempo, is I got to take my troop to Indonesia and I loved it. Sumatra is awesome. It's also an area where they're probably going to see a auto shop on one floor and a kindergarten on the second floor. It just, there's no regulation, but it was just such a cool experience. I got to, work independently. And I think what was most important about that time is I had leaders who trusted me. It was just, hey, here's your spot, here's your task, and go accomplish it. And the amount of latitude I got to have was probably one of the most invigorating Army experiences possible. During all of that, I met my wife, who we're having our first kid come June, which we're pretty pumped about. It's like less than 60 days out as well. But that's when I started to slow down a bit. I found myself surfing more. I found myself, taking my time cooking dinner for Kirsten and I, and just really enjoying that time together. And I think one of the hardest parts about the Army is, although it gives you security, you do sacrifice a ton of agency. And specifically, what I mean by that is you don't necessarily know like what the next assignment looks like, or if you want to plan your life out, what that whole experience is going to be. Then again, being a civilian as well, you can make the same argument because, you're at the whims of the economy or, your company's forecast. But I just found I wanted a little bit more control over my personal life and also the direction I wanted to go professionally. I opted to submit my refrad right around like the 8 year mark. And I think that's like one of the weirdest experiences possible because you do feel like you did a good job, right? But at the same time, too, you do feel like you are letting the team down. And unfortunately, I think the Army still hasn't figured out how to properly say goodbye to officers. I mean, I'm sure you could all talk about that as well. I think it's something that you can do a good job for your time there and then still decide to get out later on and consider it a good career. I don't think it's an all or nothing thing where if you do 20 years of service or you don't, you're a complete failure. And unfortunately, with having to tell your unit a year before you actually get out, it's kind of like telling your spouse you want to get a divorce, but you're still living in the same house for a year straight and also expected to make it work before you finally can get going. And, it's difficult. But I think what's important too with getting out is just to have multiple options. My primary course of action, which I'm doing now, was not my primary. Super glad that it is my primary, but I'm sure we could talk more about just all the contingencies you work through, and then more specifically, just how little we actually know about being civilians or looking for that next career path. The way I kind of relate it is when you're in the Army, it's like you're on a conveyor belt where as long as you follow the DA PAM and you're successful in each step, the conveyor belt is going to keep moving. And then when you get out of the military, you're no longer on that. Your direction is dictated by you and what you want to do. And I'd argue that knowing what you want to do and knowing where you want to go are probably the most important things that you can lock in your time that you're getting out.
Well,
All the things you hit are things that we've highlighted throughout the last 6 months or so with the podcast, but it's definitely worth bringing up because it has been a bit of time since we've talked about some of those things. Griffin, what were you going to say?
I was going to say congrats on the baby on the way to begin. That's awesome and well timed post military. Certainly a more minimal time for starting a family. And I'm still over here just reeling at the fact that you chose Hawaii over Fort Polk. I mean, I don't think anyone listening to this understands that decision, probably.
Well, I could have tried to just like knock out all three CTC assignments, right? Like I could have done
Right.
command at Polk and then be a field grade at JMRC or something.
Is
And
that what they call the trifecta? Like no one
probably,
has
yeah.
ever done that and not gone crazy or stayed in the
Right.
army.
Right.
Dude, I remember when I was in processing at Fort Irwin, age 22, like butter bar and just a shiny new penny. Like this one general saying how, oh yeah, this place is like the crown jewel of CTCs. And all I could think is like, who talks that way? Like, what do you even mean by that? Yeah, I've always felt like I was kind of just culturally off from the military. Like, I performed well and I enjoyed what I did, but I never really felt like I had my group there. I mean, it was just, too nerdy or wasn't, I guess, a complete meat eater like the infantry or maneuverists would say. But, the whole experience is really absurd if you unpack it. It's a lot to give to like an age 17-year-old when they show up to the academy and then through that early 20s phase where your brain is just mush, like you're really being shaped and everything.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
sounds like you never developed an affinity for crayon taste, is what you're saying.
No, and I work with a lot of prior Marines in my current job as well, and I'm familiar with the weirding ways of the crayon eaters.
Right. Well, what you mentioned too is like just having that conversation about a divorce a year before you can actually action anything. The person you're having that conversation with is somebody who's been married to the Army their entire lives. And it's often, we've mentioned this before, it's oftentimes, you got to remember you're having this conversation with somebody who probably doesn't understand the idea of getting out of the military. They don't understand the idea of getting health care on your own because at that point, even if they have thought about getting out, they're retiring from the military if they're a lieutenant colonel or above. So they're never going to have to think about healthcare or, a lot of the things that a transition comes with. And it's like you need to communicate that in a way to where, you get a little bit more time, a little bit more flexibility to be able to pursue your transition. How did that go? Were you able to do like a CSP or anything like that?
Yeah. I was incredibly lucky with the people I broke the news to. When I first talked with my squadron commander as a pre-command captain that like, hey, I'm thinking about getting out once my term is up. He wasn't like, hey, you've invalidated my life choice, so I'm going to isolate you. Instead, he was like, yeah, why don't you keep an open mind, like still take command. And he got a lot of development. And I'm so fortunate that he was like that because if they just wrote me off, I never would have gotten to. Yeah, I feel like I really grew up when I was a commander. It wasn't necessarily the responsibilities. It was instead that it was a good mark in the sand that you're past the point where you need to be figuring things out, and more so, you just have to make decisions and own them and continue to move forward. And after I did that, it was trending well, and I was going to take command of an HHT, but I still wanted to get out. And I was lucky that my commander at the time was like, hey, despite the fact that you're performing well, and I would love to have you take on, tons of property and be the squadron fall guy for whenever that goes through. He gave me a really easy broadening job up at division where I wasn't really responsible for a lot. And I got to do a CSP with one of my teammates from college, Taylor Goucher, who he still has his company in Honolulu. And I think like what was the best part about my CSP wasn't necessarily that I was learning a business skill or I was getting exposed to different things. It was instead, truthfully, I just finally had time to think. And the really great transition help I got was through the Commit Foundation, which is a little bit lesser known. And I think why is because the Commit Foundation doesn't focus on placing you in a job, or they don't necessarily get paid if you transfer into a company and that company pays them for giving a quality hire. Instead, they're a pure nonprofit, and what they exist to do is let you figure out what you want to do, which I thought I wanted to work in the surf industry when I was 1 year out from getting out of the Army, and going through the Commit Foundation, having an executive coach assigned and doing sessions with them, and then this asynchronous learning that allowed you to focus on what your true values are and what you want to do. I went through this whole loop to where I thought I wanted to do surf industry to, hey, I want to work in defense technology, which probably are the polar opposites of each other, but I'm just so grateful I went through that process because I think I would have wrote off an entire industry that I truly enjoy working in. And more importantly, too, it still allows me to build off of my experiences that I had in the Army versus doing a full career pivot, which I think that is very difficult to do, which is why I'm really grateful. There's so many great organizations that help people focus maybe on going to get an MBA or doing that 1 to 2 year transition education or job that allows you to take the good things that you had from your service, but polish them a little bit more and apply them to what would make you valuable or at least interesting to bring on to a company that's focused on generating revenue and more importantly, generating a profit.
Not to get too tactical, that's great advice. I think like overall, like it's really good, just good for people to hear. How did you, so you were in Hawaii when you were doing your job search and then ended up back in California for a minute. How did the distance impact the job search there, and what did you do to get that transition going?
I think that when you're getting out, it's just like planning an operation. You assess risk and then you own risk. And I identified that with my skill set and the market on Oahu, probably not the best idea to get straight out of the military and then try to look for work on Oahu. And I think what I realized is if long term I want to be on Oahu or in Hawaii, probably the fastest way to get out here is to instead go back to the mainland and work in a position that exposes me to an economy that just has more opportunities, but also to just more people that I could meet and hopefully learn more from. My original plan of working straight out of the army didn't actually pan out. I instead was on option two, where I was enrolled in business school at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which it's a great regional program, but it's not a top 20 or one of these programs that everybody brags about getting into. And I figured, hey, I just want to use my GI Bill. I want to focus on Kirsten and my family. And also, I want to be by quality surf. So let me live in Morro Bay. And even though it's cold water, have some fun. And in the meantime, I had been applying off and on to roles. And I remember I applied to a role at Anduril Industries thinking that there's no way I have no referral and like my resume isn't really that good. Let's just see what happens though. I think I applied in March or April, and fast forward to end of May, I'm no longer in Hawaii, just moved into the house that Kirsten and I are renting for my time at school. And I finally got invited for an interview. And I was like, okay, let's see what happens here. Screener went well. I met my first manager, Lucas, who that guy, just the level of patience he had with me, but more importantly, to the ability to identify like, hey, here's some things you could do to make yourself stand out. Like I still try to do what he does. He just was so good at giving you a chance to succeed in front of people and help build your reputation within the company. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. After that screener interview, did the team interview, and the day after, our household goods were delivered by the military for free to our place in San Luis Obispo, I got a job offer to go down to Costa Mesa in Orange County. So did not plan that out that well. Also, right after my wife and I did a trans-Pacific move back to California, we moved again 5 hours south to Laguna Beach. And that first year I had with my company, I just was so grateful because geographic location was good for Kirsten and I and our interests. The opportunities in the role were great for my own growth. I wasn't put into something beyond my own potential, and also I was put into something with a lot of redundancies and the expectation that you grow into it. And I was put into a company with high growth, and finally too, like the company culture was just something that I'm still proud to be part of and really exciting. Like I didn't have a normal college experience, right? The academy is like, let's take every weird kid in America and lock them in a castle for 4 years and see how they turn out. And so getting to work at a defense tech startup, it kind of felt more like how I imagined college would be, just people really excited about what they were doing, wanting to learn and collaborate. And it's just an invigorating process. I've been at Anduril for almost 2 years now, and I'm still so shocked that I get to be here. It hasn't really worn off. Yes, it is a job and there's plenty of things you could complain about with your work, but at the end of the day, I still can't believe the work that I get to work for. And also, if I did plan out my transition like a full-on op order, I never would have planned to do something like this. And I think that's one of the fun things about the spontaneity of life that we don't really get a chance to talk about or to kind of tell people to just, try to be surprised and enjoy the ride.
I want to come back to Anduril specifically because I love your account there. But first, you mentioned while you were with the Commit Foundation that you kind of took a bit of a U-turn or a pivot from you wanted to be in the surf industry, then you all of a sudden decided that defense tech might be something you'd be interested in. I read one of your blog posts, and I really enjoy your writing, by the way, but you mentioned you felt that the guardrails of identity dropped when you were transitioning out. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more or have you expand upon kind of that concept. How did those guardrails drop? Where did you tap into that was new or unexpected as part of that sort of searching process that you were going through personally, but also through the Commit Foundation to lead to that pivot towards defense tech?
Yeah. If in 2018 you asked me what my idea of success would be, I'd say squadron command of a heavy squadron or just anything involving a leadership opportunity within the Army with influence and on my platform of choice. And I'm so grateful that people still want to do that. And I think that it's an awesome career path. But what I realized is, I actually didn't like the army as much as I wanted to say out loud that I did. I hate being dirty. I like to shower every day, right? Also, too, even though tank gunnery is so cool and so fun, that's maybe like 2% of the job. I felt like I had more in common with a human resources organization as a troop commander than an organization focused on lethality, just because there's so many people and unfortunately, like you get a large people org, there are problems that arise, and you're that kind of first layer that can say yes or no. So you do have to focus on providing capabilities for them, or unfortunately, transitioning them out if they're unable to keep up with the regulations or expectations. But I think when I realized, like, hey, I actually don't like the army that much, that's when I was trying to just throw darts at the wall of like what would stick. And at the time, I was surfing quite a bit, and I thought, wow, it'd be so cool to, get into the surf industry because I like surfing. So maybe work wouldn't feel like work if I was doing that. But as I did my research, I was like, okay, this is actually a lot more like the fashion industry. And on top of that, Quicksilver, Billabong, all those brands, they had their heyday in the early 2000s, and now they're sold at Costco for $15 a pop because all the money is gone and they're really not cool anymore. So realizing the market's shrunk a lot, and it'd be cool to be, say, like a regional sales manager for Rip Curl selling wetsuits across Southern California, but it just wasn't also pulling on some of the things I was interested in. We talked about how the cool thing about Armor Branch is like that inflection of technology and doctrine and maneuver. And it was actually when I was packing up my house and I just have all these military books I'm putting into a box. And Kirsten, my wife, she said to me, hey, it's a real shame that you don't want to do something military facing or in defense or government because you clearly care about this stuff and are really interested. And that's when it kind of started clicking. Maybe I should look for something else. And when I was going through the Commit Foundation, I got invited to attend a workshop in Palo Alto that was hosted by Andreessen Horowitz. And Andreessen Horowitz is one of the largest venture capital firms in the country. Also, a lot of their general managers invest in general partners invested in defense startups. And the keynote speaker at mine was Catherine Boyle, and she has the American Dynamism Fund. And one of the crown jewels of American Dynamism was Anduril Industries. And at that workshop, I just got to hear about what the company was doing. And more importantly, there were some alums of Palantir and some of those earlier defense startups. And I thought they were so cool. Like I wanted to be like them. They were confident. They also were interested in things that I found important, like the national interest, but they also were people you wanted to be around at the end of the day. And it's like they had all these, specific things that I valued, like interests outside of work that they do, though, they value and they focus on. Also, the work that they do has an impact. And really, that's when I just started applying to roles at Anduril. When I was describing earlier, how I got into that one role that I started at, that was probably my sixth application to the company at that point. I think another hard thing about getting out is job roles and descriptions only make sense to the people who wrote them or the people who are inside of the company. If you don't have some type of decoder or someone on the inside to explain to you, hey, here are the skills they're looking for, or here's what you're doing day to day, you'll find yourself applying for something like director of JADC2 Hawaii when you have no business trying to do that, getting straight out of the army with no contacts at Indo-PACOM.
Right. And that's actually a really good takeaway. You're hitting so many things that I want to unpack. I think it's phenomenal that, you had a spouse that had the clarity and the understanding of your personality to kind of hint, maybe you should think about this because I know you. And she also had the just wherewithal to say, hey, this might be something you should pursue. And it sounds like it was a perfect fit. Like it sounds like everything's going really well for you guys. And I'm really glad to hear that. The second thing though is putting yourself out there. Join the organization, go to the event, go experience the thing, and maybe somebody will say something that will pique your interest and it will lead you down a path that will actually like change your life. And it's kind of what it sounds like
And then
is you were
apply
able
six
to,
times. That's
and then,
incredible.
yeah, yeah. But that is that. So not that was going to be my next point is like not giving up is a common thread across all the interviews that we have on this podcast. People just figure out what they want and then they don't take no for an answer. And it generally works out that way if you have the long lasting ability to stick with something like that. So it sounds like everything's going really well. So you've been with them for 2 years. Do you kind of see it as something you're going to stick with for a very long time, especially if they continue to give the flexibility of living in Hawaii?
I am so happy to be in the org within the company I'm in. My manager, she is someone I would want to be like 9 years from now. As long as I keep getting to work with people who I look up to or I have leadership who, they're at a time in life where I could see myself wanting to be at as well, I'm gonna stick around. On top of that, just the company has done so much to grow me, and I really value loyalty. And I don't really want to go anywhere else in the near future. Maybe down the road, if defense continues to kind of have this huge focus and there's an earlier thing that some other people go to start, I'll probably try to attach myself to their coattails because I'm not creative. I have no organic thought. Instead, I just copy people. So I will try to do the less risky thing. But I just I feel like I've grown a lot because I'm interested in the content that I work on every day. And also, I feel like probably one of the dumbest people on most of my Zoom calls. And it forces me to have to, dig into engineering docs or doctrine and, worst case, asking our company LLM what something means, which is very helpful. Thank God we live in the era of AI. That has helped me a ton for sure.
Well, I can refute the claim that you're not creative. Having read your writing, that is absolutely categorically false.
Thanks.
You certainly are. But I have a multi-part Anduril question here. First one being, I understand they're not the biggest fans of remote work. How did you convince them to allow your Hawaii residence?
I'm not remote, actually. So Hawaii is like the Pentagon without being the Pentagon. You have numerous four-star headquarters on one tiny little rock. So the reason I'm out here is because I'm customer facing at a couple of those commands out here. And this was not the first role I started in. I started in customer success, helping maintain remotely all of our autonomous towers at the southern border, which I knew nothing about navigating the command line. And I had some really good people within the company train me up. And more importantly, too, they had patience with me to allow me to eventually be successful. But as I progressed through that, my manager at the time knew that I had a bit of an aptitude for wanting to be more in a people lead role, and he was a prior Marine, so he helped tee that up. And then this opportunity popped up on Oahu to just kind of help unite a couple of these customer facing people. We had a really like just some intense plays at specific commands, but there wasn't a lot of unity with it because people are just so darn busy every day in a skiff. So I got to have the nice job of not necessarily being in the skiff, but helping consolidate all their work and being that data layer between Oahu and our Seattle office. And the company itself prides itself on in person, and I really value it too. It's so much easier to just have a conversation in passing with someone versus, setting up a 30-minute Zoom call. On top of that, I think that Zoom is usually a performance. The real meeting isn't happening in that 30 minutes that you set together. It's actually happening 5 minutes before it or 5 minutes after when the camera is off. And if you're not in the room or you're not in the building, you are missing out on that chance to try to frame things or influence others. That's something that they don't prepare you for as a civilian, I think, which is just how many decisions are already made before the meeting even starts. And I'm happy that I've kind of figured out that so far.
I don't mean to say anything like an HR issue or anything like that, but there are so many things that people don't want to say on a camera or they don't want to say in an email, but they would say across a desk in order to get things done. And again, I don't mean anything like any weird or things that they're saying wrong, but there's just sometimes it's risky career wise to put yourself out there in a meeting when there's when it's recorded and when there's proof that you said it. And I think some people are more willing to bring up outside of the box ideas if it's just a one-on-one person conversation?
I think a lot of it too is we're cavemen in a modern era. Like the hardware I got up here is the same stuff that a hunter-gatherer had, 20,000 years ago. And yes, Zoom and remote stuff does help like copy and mimic some of those feelings we get from reading people or being in the room, but it will never replace like having a live being in front of me, reading their facial features, also picking up on the inflections of their voice. On top of that, too, I don't know if you guys ever went through this before, but I've had people I've talked with on Zoom for like 2 or 3 months, and then I actually didn't really recognize them in person until after 5 minutes of them being around me in the room. Zoom helps, but it's not a full replacement. And I think just as humans, we yearn for belonging and a group, and you do need to have that in-person culture to be successful.
If someone was interested in learning more about Anduril or the type of work that you all do, I guess that being the first part of the question, how would they go about that? And then the second part being, let's say they are interested in Anduril, they think that's the route they want to go. What would you advise them to do as far as trying to find a position there?
I think the first thing I'd tell them is like take their time and actually dig into things. There's a huge difference between seeing one product and thinking like that's where you want to go versus, getting a copy of the Kill Chain and reading through Chris Brose's thesis for why the company exists and what they want to achieve. And if you're not willing to read those 300 pages, at least go read our long form blog, rebootingthearsenal.com, that discusses how defense has evolved since the 90s and why companies like SpaceX, Palantir, and Anduril exist. And then after doing that, you just start trying to talk to people who have either had a successful career at a defense prime or at Palantir or Anduril. Just seek out those 90 cups of coffee so that you're able to refine what you want and more importantly, know that this is the exact course of action. And then, finally apply. I think that when I do interviews with people, the first question that we always ask is why Anduril? And you can tell right away if it's someone who has done the research and figured out for themselves, this is something I want to do, versus they watched a 3-minute YouTube clip and they try to name drop a product. But, unless you've worked for the company or the product's been deployed at your unit, you probably have no actual idea how to employ it or what you're talking about.
We've talked before about how the military does a good job at creating camaraderie. It sounds like there is some camaraderie at the company that you love, and it does fill that void with as far as people that you can, try to emulate and try to, the leadership is there. What else are you doing besides surfing that kind of fills your cup?
Yeah, well, like, as my son approaches in June, that's probably going to be taking up most of the cup. But I really like the people I work with. Yesterday, I was at the motocross track in Kahuku with one of my coworkers and, whiskey throttling a little 85 and, terrifying myself on a two-stroke, but having so much fun. And I really like that the people I work with, they have interests outside and they kind of let you in on that. The other thing too, yeah, I pay attention to my LinkedIn. If someone's a veteran and they message me asking like, hey, like, can you chat for 20 minutes? Even though it might take me a while to respond, I always get around to it. People seeking out information, I always want to help. Now, people asking overtly for a referral, I will ignore you. Don't do that. I think instead, though, if it's definitely someone in the O2 to O3 category that's still trying to figure out what they want to do, like, I always want to talk to them, and usually I'll point them to the Commit Foundation or a couple other books or things that influence my own thinking. I would much rather someone figures out exactly what they want to do versus they see like, oh, this is working for him. Maybe it'll work for me.
I love this quote from I'll quote you again from one of your blog posts, but you said, in the Army, I always found myself looking forward to the next thing, achieving a rank, completing a school, getting a job. Surfing is the antithesis to this trap. I don't surf to achieve a specific thing. I surf for the pure love of the process. For one, I love that phrase. But two, can you talk about, do you find yourself falling into the trap of competing for the next promotion, the next position within Anduril? Do you find yourself still kind of gravitating towards that, sort of continuing the process that the Army is maybe so thoroughly ingrained in us? Or do you feel like there are ways to avoid that? And love to hear you kind of expand upon your thoughts there.
Whatever you chase after, you will never feel like you have enough of. Money, influence, and yeah, like of course, as I get exposed to more things, there's that part of me with the ego that's going, wait, like maybe I could go further. Like let's keep pushing this a little bit. Or I'll compare myself to others and go like, well, why are they so much further ahead? I think the thing that allows me to reset is waking up early during the winter season, getting out in the water, feeling like the wind not moving and just having that pure glass on the water and sunrises. It's just that beautiful, like pinkish color. And that first wave approaches, and you just kind of feel the unlimited potential right before you pop up. And like the board is moving on its own energy without you paddling. You're about to take off on the wave. And usually that's the feeling that resets me. And more importantly, too, that's where I do my best thinking. I don't believe in packing all 24 hours of your day. You need unstructured play, even as an adult, whether that's going surfing, going for a jog. There have been so many things at work where I just have a eureka moment on a run or while surfing because I've freed my mind and I've allowed everything inside to kind of do the work without me at the wheel the whole time.
I always love tapping into how someone keeps, or at least attempts to keep the goalposts from moving, because, like you said, it's inevitable for all of us. Ego comes into play, and it's always naturally like, what's the next thing? What's the next milestone I can achieve or goal that I can strive after? But I think it's so important. Like you've very clearly defined how you prevent your goalposts from moving, and that's through surfing, through unstructured play, through having white space to actually think and process things, which I think is so overlooked and a lot easier said than done for most.
Yeah, I usually hate self-help books, but 4,000 Weeks is a great read. Just one, it's quick, it's written simply, so anyone can kind of get through and comprehend it. But yeah, a lot of us were just racing towards the red light. We're all gonna die someday. And if you try to shoot for something, by the time you get there, like what do you have left? I think that my life is probably gonna feel the same all the way up until the end. So I might as well have some things that I enjoy in the day to day, or at least some type of thing that keeps me in the present moment. The other thing too is just having a great spouse. My wife just not only does she help me think through a lot of things, she also does a great job of just reminding, dude, we have enough. Slow down. Like, why are you already talking about trying to move to like a different location within the company or, vying for this different opportunity? Like, we're good where we are, just enjoy it. And those reminders have always been something that I've appreciated with her.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it sounds like the three of us are kind of cut from a similar cloth. Obviously we all have our differences, but we also all married really strong women. So I
Yeah.
love that. I think it's great. And it not just because you have a capable, intelligent spouse doesn't mean that they're tied in enough to be able to give that sort of advice, right? Like, you have to communicate in a certain way and be truthful and honest with your spouse, especially during a transition, because we're not the only ones transitioning. It's also their life is also being uprooted, and it's a big change for them. So, how did you guys manage that transition talk? And like obviously, she has her own pursuits and career. Like, how did that go?
So Kirsten, original plan was she was going to be the breadwinner while I was, using my GI Bill and in San Luis Obispo. She had been selected for the President's Management Fellowship, which is sponsored by the Office of Personnel Management. You apply to it after having a graduate degree, and you're typically assigned to a GS role that leads to a leadership position within an agency. And her first job was with the VA in the Women's Health Division. And originally, she was going to work that, and I was going to go to school and we're cruising. And then I got the job offer. And, you know, whether or not it's completely said, like Kirsten, she did have to make some sacrifices with her own career and her wants in order to allow me to be successful. And I always will be grateful for how Kirsten put her own career on hold in some ways, or just, chose to do something else. My wife and I are both hyper competitive with each other. When she was an officer, she was truthfully a much better lieutenant than I was. She went to sapper school. Like, I don't have any tab. She does. She got the engineer platoon leader of the year award for the entire army. Meanwhile, I was probably top of the bell curve when it comes to armor officers. And, on the outside, she has enabled so much of my success. And truthfully, I think at a cost to her own professional goals. So I always will have that gratitude towards my wife, and I always will be aware of those sacrifices that she's made to allow me to have the success that I do. But what helps is we're family and we share in each other's success. So the success that I've been able to have with my role, that's translated to our own lives. And, that's what I think allows us to keep going.
Courtney and I were just talking about that, how it was almost like, how interesting would it be if you were in command, but your spouse was also in command with you, or if you're in a role and your spouse was able to help out. And that's a big decision, especially with transitioning out, is like, how can we work together to achieve whatever our goal is, right? It doesn't have to be more money or more, better title, but how can we like manage both of our skills, kind of the yin and yang for a lot of us to be able to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And it sounds like you guys are managing that well. We usually end with basically a two-part question. One is, how can our audience help you? And the other is going to be, is there something that you can offer the audience that's listening?
I think how the audience could help me is just do a good job in the army, right? A huge reason why we're able to transition into other careers is because society still values the service that we do, and they look at the experiences we had in the army as something that's honorable and something to be valued. Continue to do that. And what I don't want is people to be in such a hurry to get through their time as a junior military officer to get into their next career path that they forget, hey, that first step is one of the most important steps in your life. Also, it's originally why I joined. When I was 17, I wanted to be a soldier and I didn't think anything else, right? So do a good job in the current job that you're doing. And the second way that I could help is just message me on LinkedIn if you want to have a coffee chat about getting out, or even what you're doing in the army now. I love being able to just listen to people and kind of hear what's going on with that, and doing those conversations myself when I was transitioning. That was great interview prep because it allowed me to figure out my own elevator pitch and the story I wanted to tell in my service. And on top of that, it just exposes you to other people so that you're able to hear how they think, or you can get their feedback. Don't let the first time that you're doing that be an interview, which did happen to me with some other companies. And let me tell you, I stumbled pretty hard on some of them.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah, Julian, I think everyone we've talked about before, everyone deals with three key losses when they leave the military, or seemingly everyone: loss of purpose, tribe, and security. And I think the way that you frame leaving the comfort and security of the military and the relatability of your story and going through that and finding that kind of purpose and tribe and security outside of the military through your current pursuits, through your surfing pastime and otherwise, and through your family is going to be an incredibly helpful story for other people to hear as they either consider their transition or are already on the other side and trying to find some of those things. So I appreciate your transparency here and sharing that, because it's really helpful for a lot of people, I'm sure.
Awesome. I think like one thing I'll say too, if you're unhappy in the army, you're probably going to be unhappy outside of the army. Like, the army is a people organization. The same people that you meet in the army, you're going to meet that same archetype or personality wherever you go next. And I think you really do just need to become comfortable with yourself and try to identify your own happiness, and not try to like put it into something that doesn't exist. And then when you get there, find that it's not there. A lot of people just, I don't think, do that work internally, and they set themselves up for failure when they get out.
And that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, right? Because it's easy to blame your surroundings and say, hey, like, it's not me that has a problem. It's just, if I just change, if I just transfer out and move on to something else, it'll be fine. But you're absolutely correct. Is like your own, just the way that you treat everything is gonna. What's the saying?
How you do
Small.
anything is how you do everything.
Right. I mean, that kind of applies to what you're talking about. Like, if you're in a bad mood about the military, it's probably not just the military. I mean,
Yeah.
You
It's like
gotta have
Patrick
good
Swayze in
attitude.
Roadhouse. Just be nice. It's that easy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, it's so great to hear things are going well. I mean, obviously, I knew that the career was going well. I knew the transition and everything, but I'm glad we were able to reconnect on here. And thank you for doing this too. It's just our way to try to give some sort of information to some people transitioning out. But I appreciate your time and thanks for finding the time to do this.
Of course, guys. All right, I'll see you around.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures Podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures Podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.